By the end of this video, you will have witnessed over 1,000 years of pure, unadulterated betrayal. We are not just looking at a boring list of old dates. We are counting down every single time the English throne was violently, deceptively, and illegally stolen. Think of the crown like the ultimate prize in a dangerous game of musical chairs, where the players used swords instead of music, and losing meant losing your head. To bring this dark history directly to you, we are using cutting-edge technology today. You will see the hyper-realistic, AI reconstructed faces of these ruthless usurpers exactly as they looked when they grabbed power. We are bringing faces lost to history back to life based on real historical data, so you can look these thieves right in the eye. The data shows us a clear, undeniable truth. The British crown is not a symbol of neat, peaceful succession. Instead, it is a bloody prize won through murder, family backstabbing, and battlefield theft. The history books like to make royalty seem noble and polite, but the facts tell a completely different story. It is a story of kings and queens who behaved more like ruthless mob bosses than chosen rulers. Get ready, because we are stripping away the myths and looking at the raw, unfiltered truth of how the throne was taken by force. To truly understand how this cycle of theft began, we have to look at a time when the kingdom was still young and fragile. Our first data point takes us back to a teenager who was stabbed in the back while drinking wine on horseback. This was King Edward, a young boy who inherited the crown but did not realize just how dangerous his own family could be. You see, Edward had a stepmother who wanted her own 10-year-old son, Athelred, to be the king instead. The historical records suggest that she orchestrated a terrible plot. While Edward was visiting her castle, he was handed a cup of wine as a gesture of welcome. As he drank, an assassin sneaked up behind him and drove a blade into his back. He bled to death right there in the saddle, and his crown was instantly stolen for his little half-brother. Now, let us look at the AI face reconstruction of young Athelred. When you look into his eyes, you do not see a mastermind. You see a terrified 10-year-old boy who was handed a stolen kingdom by a murderous mother. This theft completely broke the trust of the nation, and the data shows that Ethelred's reign was doomed from the start. He earned the nickname the Unready, which actually means badly advised, because he simply did not have the wisdom or the support to protect England. Because the throne was taken through a cowardly murder, his leadership was weak, and the country was left wide open for the next wave of thieves to row across the sea and take it all away. Imagine having your dead body dug up from a holy grave, violently beheaded, and tossed directly into the muddy waters of the River Thames. That is exactly how the next major theft of the English throne ended, and it shows just how petty and vicious these royal rivalries could get. This brings us to a dark chapter where two half-brothers, Harold Harefoot and Harthacnut, fought like wolves over their father's empire. The data shows that Harold was actually an illegitimate son, meaning he was not the rightful heir to the crown. But he noticed a perfect opportunity when his brother Harthacnut was stuck overseas defending Denmark. Harold did not hesitate. He swooped in, ignored the rules of succession, and stole the English throne right out from under his brother's nose. But as your mentor in history, I have to tell you that stolen power rarely lasts, and vengeance in this era was brutal. Harold ruled for only a few years before suddenly dying just weeks before his brother could launch an invasion to take back what was stolen. When Harthacnut finally arrived in England, he was absolutely furious that his brother had escaped his wrath by dying. To send a terrifying message to anyone else who might try to steal the crown, Harthacnut ordered his men to dig up Harold's fresh corpse from its royal resting place in Westminster Abbey. They chopped off the dead king's head and threw his body into the river like common trash. If you think that is petty, just wait until we get to the Middle Ages, because the methods of stealing the throne only get more creative and far more violent from here. When we look at the AI face reconstruction of Harthacnut, the data reveals the grim face of a deeply angry and unpopular ruler. He was the last Danish king to rule England, and he ruled with absolute terror because he knew just how easily a crown could be stolen by family. He proved that back then, winning the throne did not just mean defeating your living enemies, it meant dominating them even after they were gone. The data tells us that an arrow straight through the eye changed the course of global history forever. This brings us to the year 1066, the most famous heist in the history of the crown. At the time, a man named Harold II was the king, but he was a man living on borrowed time. He had no royal blood, but he had been elected by the powerful leaders of the land. However, across the sea in France, a man named William was watching and waiting. William was known as the bastard because of his birth, but he claimed the throne had been promised to him. To William, Harold was not a king. He was a common thief who had moved into a house that didn't belong to him. What happened next was a masterclass in how to take a kingdom by force. William did not just come to fight. He came to replace everything. When he landed on the south coast, Harold had to march his exhausted army hundreds of miles just to meet him. At the Battle of Hastings, the Saxon era came to a sudden bloody end when King Harold was killed on the field. William the Conqueror didn't just take the crown, he took the entire country. He replaced every single Saxon leader with his own Norman friends and built giant stone castles to make sure no one could ever steal it back from him. He even changed the language we speak, which is why we use French-style words like beef and noble today. Now, look at the AI face reconstruction of these two rivals. On one side, you see Harold II, the last of the Old English kings, looking tired and desperate. On the other, you see the stern, cold eyes of William the Conqueror. William's face shows the grit of a man who spent his life fighting for respect and finally took the ultimate prize. He proved that if you are strong enough and ruthless enough, you don't just steal a throne. You build a brand new world on top of the old one. He died after falling from his horse, but the system of power he stole and rebuilt lasted for centuries. Imagine a king so desperate for power that he sprinted across the English Channel to steal the crown before his own cousin could even pack her bags. This level of greed brings us to a dark time known as the Monarchy, a 19-year period where the government completely collapsed because of a family feud. The data shows that King Henry I had a very clear plan for who should rule after him. Since his only son had tragically drowned in a shipwreck, he named his daughter, Matilda, as his rightful heir. He even made all the powerful lords swear an oath to support her. But the moment the old king died, his nephew Stephen decided that oaths were just words and the crown was a prize for whoever was fastest. Stephen did not wait for a funeral or a meeting. He rushed to England, seized the royal treasury, and had himself crowned before Matilda could even cross the sea to claim what was hers. This was a pure, high-speed heist of a nation. But as your mentor, I must tell you that stealing a throne is much easier than keeping a country peaceful. Because Stephen was a weak leader who took power illegally, many lords felt they didn't have to obey him. This triggered a brutal civil war that lasted for nearly 2 decades. The history books tell us that during this time, Christ and his saints slept because the suffering was so great. When we look at the AI face reconstruction of Stephen, we see the face of a man who was a brave soldier but a disastrous king. His face shows the stress of a man who spent 19 years fighting a war he couldn't win against a woman who wouldn't give up. Eventually, the data shows he had to give in. After his own son died, he was forced to name Matilda's son, Henry, as his heir just to stop the bleeding. This era proves a vital lesson. When you steal a throne through trickery, you aren't just stealing power. You are stealing the peace and safety of every person in the kingdom. I know you have been waiting for this one. Imagine a queen who was so fed up with her husband's poor leadership that she teamed up with her secret lover to take him down. This led to one of the most gruesome ends in the history of the crown. King Edward II was widely seen as a weak and incompetent ruler who suffered a humiliating defeat against the Scots. His wife, Queen Isabella, eventually had enough. The data shows that she joined forces with a nobleman named Roger Mortimer to depose her own husband in 1327. But they didn't just want him gone, They wanted to make sure he could never return. Legend claims that while he was imprisoned, Edward II was murdered by having a red-hot poker thrust into his body so it would leave no visible marks on the outside. This allowed the throne to be stolen and passed to his young son, Edward III. But the cycle of theft did not stop there. The records show that stealing a kingdom often becomes a family tradition. Fast forward to King Richard II, a ruler who grew to be very extravagant and deeply unpopular. His own cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, had been sent away into exile, but he didn't stay away for long. Henry returned to England, gathered an army, and seized the throne to become King Henry IV. He was the very first monarch from the House of Lancaster. As for the deposed Richard II, he was locked away in a cold castle and likely starved to death in the year 1400. When you look at the AI face reconstructions of these men, the data reveals the heavy cost of this lifestyle. Henry IV face shows a man who spent his entire reign defending himself against plots and rebellions, eventually dying as a broken man. He learned the hard way that when you take a crown from a cousin, you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder to see who is coming to take it from you. These stories show us that in the Middle Ages, the palace was often just a fancy waiting room for the next betrayal. Two little boys go into a massive stone tower for what they are told is their own protection, and they are never seen alive again. This brings us to one of the most chilling thefts in the history of the crown, featuring a man who would do anything to become king. When King Edward IV died suddenly, he left behind a 12-year-old son who was supposed to take the throne. However, the boy's uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, had other plans. Instead of protecting his young nephew, Richard locked the boy and his younger brother away in the Tower of London. He then declared that both boys were illegitimate and took the crown for himself as King Richard III. The two young princes vanished from the pages of history, and the data strongly suggests they were murdered on their uncle's direct orders. But as your mentor in history, I must remind you that what goes around comes around, and retribution for this theft was incredibly swift. Richard's ruthless actions made him deeply unpopular, and a new challenger was waiting in the wings. A man named Henry Tudor landed in Wales and marched into England with a growing army. In 1485, the two sides met at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Richard III was betrayed by his own allies on the battlefield and killed in active combat, making him the very last English king to die in battle. His crown was literally plucked from the dirt and placed onto Henry Tudor's head right there on the field. As for Richard, his body was treated with total disrespect and lost for over 500 years, until his broken skeleton was finally discovered beneath a common car park in 2012. When we look at the AI face reconstructions of these two men, we see a fascinating contrast. Richard III's face looks intense and deeply stressed, showing the heavy burden of a man who destroyed his own family for a stolen prize. On the other hand, Henry VII looks sharp, calculating, and careful. He went on to merge the warring houses of York and Lancaster, creating the famous Tudor Rose to bring stability back to a broken land. This violent shift in power teaches us a permanent lesson about human nature. A throne built on the betrayal of children is highly unstable, and it usually ends with the thief losing everything in the mud. The data shows us that the ultimate theft of the crown did not come from a rival royal or a foreign invader. Instead, it came from a man who banned Christmas entirely. This brings us to a time when the people of England decided to steal the throne away from the entire royal system. King Charles I believed he was chosen by God and could do whatever he wanted, which led to a terrible civil war against his own parliament. The king lost that war, and in an unprecedented move, he was put on trial for treason and publicly beheaded in 1649. With the king dead, the monarchy was completely abolished, and the throne was essentially stolen by the public and replaced with a republic. The man who stepped into this vacuum of power was Oliver Cromwell. He was not born into royalty, but he used his powerful military to become the Lord Protector, ruling England like a strict dictator. Under his rule, theaters were closed down, celebrations were banned, and life became very grim. But as your mentor, I must tell you that when you steal a system of government by force, it is very hard to make it last. The data reveals that the people quickly grew tired of this harsh lifestyle. Just 2 years after Cromwell died, the old system was brought back in a massive historical twist. The dead king's son, Charles II, was invited back to reclaim his father's stolen throne while cheering crowds packed the streets to celebrate his return. When we look at the AI face reconstruction of Oliver Cromwell, we see a face carved from stone, with hard, unyielding eyes that reflect his strict rule. In contrast, the face of Charles II shows a man ready to bring life and energy back to a dark kingdom. This final great theft teaches us that the throne is more than just a piece of furniture or a golden hat. It is an idea. You can kill a king and lock away the crown, but human nature often craves the stability of tradition. No matter how many times the throne was stolen, broken, or buried, the idea of the kingdom always found a way to survive the thieves. From the first Anglo-Saxon betrayals to the bloody battlefields of the Tudors, the data proves a clear point. The English throne was not just neatly inherited, it was survived. We have looked past the polished myths in the history books and uncovered the raw, unfiltered truth of a crown passed from one thief to the next. Now that you have looked into the eyes of these rulers through our AI face reconstructions, I want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and let me know, which monarch had the most terrifying face, and who do you think was the most ruthless thief of them all? If you loved this deep dive into the darkest corners of royal history, you will definitely want to check out my video on the wildest scandals of the UK Prime Ministers next. Thank you for watching. Keep questioning the past, and I will see you in the next video.